Nice, plenty of time. Ah. Hello everybody, Jack here, and in this video I'm going to talk to you guys, after this car passes, I'm going to talk to you guys about relationships, at least why I find that it's easier to find a good relationship in Nicaragua than in at least a country like the United States, okay? And this is really subject to my personal experiences, but I think a lot of this is easy for a foreigner to experience. And my argument in this video basically is that it's probably easier for you to find a loving relationship in Nicaragua as a foreigner than it is for you to find a relationship in your own country. And this doesn't even really matter about what kind of relationship. I'm talking about all kinds of relationships, because there's relationships worth having, not worth having. There's relationships where you'll fool around and not care about the person. There's relationships where you'll care really deeply about them and change big parts of your life because of how much you care about having this other person in your life, right? Relationships vary a lot, and there's no catch-all thing I can tell you about people here in Nicaragua. You'll hear things online like Nicaraguan men this, Nicaraguan women that, and it's all bullshit. That is not how it works. Nicaragua has like 8 million people or 7 million people. Actually, maybe it's like 6.5. My point, there's a lot of people here, and you're gonna meet a huge variety of different individuals. That being said, I'm gonna try and talk about why, in my experience, it's easier to find someone who really loves you here, okay? And I need to talk about the circumstance of other countries first, because at least for me, when I lived in the United States, I felt much more inadequate and also really kind of lonely. I was in situations where when I was interested in somebody, either I had to work all the time to provide for them, or they were like that, in that mentality, always studying, always doing something, always doing some extracurricular activity. And in my head, this is because as a society we're lost. We focus too much on individuality, accomplishing things, becoming somebody, all of this shit. And what happens is that we distance ourselves from the reality that we're human and we need a loving relationship in order to thrive. If you don't believe that, whatever, that's fine. I fundamentally believe that a human is at their best when they're in a loving relationship that encourages them to be their best self. And a lot of us need a loving relationship to kind of take life seriously. And you can say what you want, but at least for me, and when I've seen people change, when I've changed myself, it's not because of willpower. It's not because of some individual strength or anything like that. It's because of something related to a loving relationship, or getting a loving relationship, or keeping a loving relationship, or being scared of losing it and changing something about yourself, or wanting to be able to connect with someone you have feelings for, so you spend time doing something you wouldn't normally do. These are the changes that or the real reasons behind why humans end up actually changing. But we come into this society thinking it's all about individuality, attracting another person because we're so awesome, we're so cool that we attract these people. But that isn't what happens. What happens is we grow together. And when you bring a person into your life, you will fundamentally change, right? So if you bring a person with really bad influence into your life, you will struggle, you will suffer. Whereas if you bring somebody who's a really good influence into your life, you will become empowered and be more of the person that you actually want to be. And the reason I'm talking all about this in a video about Nicaragua and relationships is because here at least it seems to be a lot easier to find people, whether they're men or women, who will place value on the relationship you have with them. I'm not saying everybody's honest. I'm not saying people here don't benefit a lot from finances. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying that in general, people here are more likely to actually place value in the relationship. Whereas in countries like the US, people don't fucking value relationships. We don't. We value work. It is acceptable to do what's right for work and neglect your spouse or your husband or wife or child and spend less time of them. You could argue that the whole public education system in the US exists to babysit kids so their parents can work more. We are obsessed with work. And it's the sad thing is we're not forced to be that way. And I know a lot of us think we're forced, but the reality is we're alive, our hearts are beating, we can change our circumstance. And especially people in the US, all you have to do is just take a little slice of that income and go live in a country like Nicaragua, and suddenly you see just how you really can just step out of this system and live a life where you have a lot of time available. And this goes into what I was talking about earlier, where here people are more likely to value the relationship you form. And I mean that they're more likely to not only value it, but spend significant amounts of time. Like here, if you're in a relationship with somebody, it's like normal that they move out of their parents' house and move in with you, and you guys spend all of your time together. And to a lot of people in like the US, that would be unthinkable. Like, how could you spend so much time around someone you love without working all the time and not go crazy and not hate them and not hate each other, right? Like, that's what people think. And because in other countries, that's the reality. We value work so much that we will spend 7 to 10 hours of every day doing things for other people before we do things for ourselves and those that we love. The way most people live in the United States values other people's shit above their own families, friends, and themselves. And that just isn't the case in Nicaragua. What's fascinating about Nicaragua is kind of the difference in what it's like to have less money. And this is relevant because people here are just more accepting. They're more inclusive of relationships. They're more inclusive of like pooling each other's resources and coordinating and working together. And this is related to why it's easier to find love here, especially as a foreigner. You're just treated as somebody who's more exotic. And at least for people I know, like myself and others, if you're really lonely and you're living in the country that you're from, it's going to be a lot easier for you to find relationships here. For so many reasons. Like, yeah, a little bit of money goes a long way. Like here, $400 or $500 a month is like college educated level income. And I don't mean for you to think that that's pitiful or that, wow, that's so little money. People barely need anything. That's the wrong way to look at it. I want you to understand that $400 or $500 a month is enough with budgeting and not living like a tourist life. You can live off of that. And many people here provide for a family off of less money than that. And there's something you need to understand if you're interested in forming romantic relationships here in Nicaragua, and it's some of these really key cultural differences. So let me get into one of those key differences, is that in Nicaragua, it's not about getting a good job. It's about being a landowner. If you are a landowner, then you have a good life. That's basically the simplest way to put it, because When you own land in Nicaragua that you have a house on, you can eat and get by with very little money. If you don't need to pay rent, which most people in the country don't, realistically, rent isn't something common for people to pay. Most people reside in a house that is owned by either a friend or a family member. So it's much more common that someone in your family owns land that you live on here. There's going to be less privacy, but it's quite likely that someone in your family or a friend has a house and your whole family now lives in that house and they don't pay rent. Whereas in the US, our populations are so much more displaced. We are shoved out of the houses as early as possible, meant to get our own houses and build our independent life and build this crap for ourselves, right? But it's societally unsustainable in our current world. And it's going to get more and more unsustainable to just build every 2 humans a house as if that's affordable, as if that's something that's good for the planet, right? We need more communal living, and the way Nicaragua is probably the direction the rest of the world is going to inevitably go back to, okay? So when you're forming relationships here, it's important that you understand this, because for people here, you could argue that the whole point of life is getting into a situation where you have land. Because once you have land, everything else becomes simpler. But in the US, it's not really like that. The cultural focus is on getting a good job and being prestigious. That's really what it, at least like from the masculine or male perspective, in general, that's what should happen, right? And women experience that as well. I'm not saying it's just a male thing, just saying that it's a probably the most noticeable cultural difference between the US and Nicaragua. And there's a lot of other cultural differences, but to be honest, it's not that different. I'm a foreigner. I was foreign to the US, so maybe that's why, but the US and Nicaragua have a lot of similarities, like a lot of similarities. And maybe US people don't think that Nicaragua is similar, but from a foreigner's perspective, Nicaragua has American culture, a lot of American culture. And I don't mean like American, like just US, just like concepts like your land is your property and anybody who comes into it is a threat, and taking this really seriously. That's very American, right? Like, it's like that in the US, it's like that in Latin America. These are kind of very American ways of thinking. And I'm not saying they don't exist in other countries, they absolutely do, but other countries don't identify with it as much, whereas here, that's more of a thing. And people act like it's not like that in Nicaragua, but it absolutely is. Like, most Nicaraguans have no interest in letting anyone into their house at all. They don't trust people to go into their houses. Like, if you let somebody into your house here, that's a huge display of trust. And sometimes, like, if it's a neighbor or whatever, simply the act of doing that is enough to disarm whatever they were worried about, because they're not used to it. They're used to just fighting at people and people never letting them inside each other's residences, because people are really guarded here. And in that way, it's exactly like it is in the US culturally, except here it's even more extreme because there's all these bars, right? And I know I've been ranting a little bit here, but I really want to lay out a lot of kind of a base for you guys to understand some of these differences, because when you're trying to form relationships, you're going to be confused if you don't kind of understand where people are coming from. And it really is different here. The focus is on getting into land ownership. Like, that's what success is having land so you don't need to work, so that you can spend time with your life and your family and enjoying things. In Nicaragua, like, that's what you're supposed to do, basically. Whereas in the US, you're supposed to get things that convince people you have a lot. From a purely societal pressure standpoint, okay? And I'm not saying Nicaragua is never going to be like that, but that seems to be how it is now. So for this reason, I think, and others, people are more invested in relationships just in general. Relationships play a big role in life here. If you're willing to marry a Nicaraguan, then the government treats you really well in general. Anytime you're invested in integrating into Nicaragua, you're usually treated very, very, very well, unless you're like belligerent or something. Family stuff and family life is a big part of Nicaraguan culture, and that's something like I read online before coming here and thought, oh, maybe that's just a bullshit thing. But it does seem to be true. Like if you are obviously trying to make a family and find a place, you're treated really well, like incredibly well. You're welcomed to do that, and people like in general respond well to like seeing foreigners in relationships. There's going to be judgment about it. Like people are going to tell the local person that like, oh, the foreigner's going to leave or whatever. That's, that kind of stuff still happens. But in general, people really are quite accepting here. It's a lot easier to get into a relationship with somebody who's going to value kind of your time and be mad at you if you don't spend time with them every day. Whereas in the US, it's a lot easier to find somebody who kind of expects you to just earn everything. And that's true here as well. Like people will expect you to just earn money, but you can just be picky and you'll find somebody who understands how you do what you do and supports that. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like a lot of the content online makes it seem like, oh, if you go to Nicaragua, all the people are like this and they're just going to do that. And like, okay, yeah, maybe that's true if you date one or two people or you just go after the first person who wants to marry you. But if you really take your time and you know what you want, you can absolutely find what you want here in Nicaragua. You can find an amazing, supportive partner. And if you're older and you want to find like a younger partner who actually cares about you, that is possible. And what's kind of weird about Nicaragua is that if you're like retiring age, it's probably easier for you to find a younger partner than it is to actually find a partner your age. And there is a part of Nicaraguan culture that views it as acceptable to date into a better life. That's very much a thing here. It's not like it is in Thailand or anything. It's not like a big part of culture. People are still going to be judged for doing that. But it is a thing. People just want a better life, and they'll marry into a better life. They'll be happy to do that. As a foreigner, my advice to you is to really be picky. Take your time. Because if you don't really know what you're doing, you're going to be high on the thrills and the novelty of being here. And you're not going to realize that you're kind of settling with a person who's not really good for you because you're still stuck in all these new emotions of this new place. So you have to be picky and really take your time to form a relationship. But once you're comfortable here and you really know and have a feel for people, you can absolutely find a really great relationship. Whether you're like in your 50s, a man, a woman, whatever. It's absolutely possible here, especially if you're open-minded. You're probably going to struggle if you've lived in one country your whole life, just because you're going to be thinking and focusing on how things are different. But if you're a person who's lived in multiple countries, Nicaragua's it's a good place to be. At least for me, as a person who values time, and like I want to be around people who want to live a life where they spend time with me, not just get really fancy jobs to convince the world and appear a certain way, but at the end of the day spend no time with their children and crap. Like I don't want a life where I have to work 8 hours a day and commute so that I can feed my children. That seems fucking dumb. Why would I do that? That's just giving my kids in the most important part of their life to somebody else, to the world. Like, what I want is a life where I can be there with them. Because what happens if my dad died when I was 11, right? What happens, or 12, I don't remember how old I was exactly. But he had spent so much time with me that was okay, basically. I got to feel what it's like to have a parent who's really, really, really there for you and spends a lot of time with you. And that really showed me, looking back and getting older, that that's what's missing, at least in US society. We don't have that. All of my friends, essentially, except like maybe one or two people, have this fundamental problem of, as kids, their parents didn't spend time with them. And honestly, a lot of the time, the parents have good intentions. They would want to spend time, but they just accepted that that wasn't possible because they needed to provide a life for them, and they had a job, and they should be very grateful for that job because they, can't make work for themselves. Now it's like, I'm fucked if I think that way. I'm screwed. I have to be able to provide for myself from work I did in the past. If I don't do that, then what? I have a family to spend 8 hours a day working? That seems absurd. I want the people I care about most should get most of my time. That seems so obvious. I don't understand why that isn't more obvious to people. We are going to die. You will die. Everybody you know and love will die. And some of them will die before you have time to spend with them. So you better spend your time with them. When my father died, I had abandoned him. Yeah, sure, I was a little kid. I didn't know any better, but it's true. I abandoned him. I didn't want to face the fact that he was dying, so I didn't like visiting him in the hospital. I would leave as soon as I could. I would take books and just read books and be next to him, but not be paying any attention to him. I regret that, because he died, and I lost all chance I will ever get to communicate with him and spend time with him. And I will never forget that. I will always remember that in this life, everybody you love can be taken away from you in any given moment. And if you don't live a life where you value the time that you have to spend with them, then you're going to regret things that you've done when you die. As far as I'm concerned, that is an absolute. So it makes no sense to me to build a life where you have to work for most of your time, and then your interests and those that you love get put behind it. They get done with what's left over of your energy. That just seems wrong. And here in Nicaragua, it's easier to find people who don't think that way and who actually value relationships. And I'm not saying everybody will. I'm just saying that if you take your time, you can find exactly what you want here in Nicaragua, whether you're a younger person or you're a retired individual. But don't expect it to just be easy. Don't expect to just be able to find the person you want straight away, immediately, without having to try, without having to support somebody who's going through hardship. These things are going to happen, right? You need to build something with somebody. So find somebody who has an effect on you that is good, and go with that person, right? All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. I have updates on the Nicaragua course. I've finished the script, and now we're going through and editing it. My fiance, Alex, is helping me. She's helping edit it, and also make me sound less offensive, because sometimes I generalize things too much from like a foreigner perspective. So she's helping me make it more inclusive and just be less antagonizing for like other people. So if you're interested in that, that video is going to be out pretty soon, probably over the next month. I'd imagine sometime in January or February. And there's about 54 different topics, and every topic has like a 30-second to 60-second video specifically answering it, and we're taking away anything that's irrelevant to the topic. So it's designed like a book. You just look at it, and then you're like, okay, I want to learn about water quality and how to pay bills and cleanliness and power outages. Then you go to this part of the video, you just look at, it's like a timestamp, you just look at the part you want to go to, and you go directly there. I'm doing it that way because it's a lot of content. It's like an hour to 2 hour long video. So I don't expect any of you guys to just watch it through. I'm thinking of it more like a dictionary on life in Nicaragua for YouTube, because this kind of content doesn't exist. There's too much like just bullshit about Nicaragua. I really want to make an informative, useful product that doesn't have a pay gate. So it's just every single concept I can think of that's relevant and really useful for people, that they're looking for, they're scared about. It's in there, and it's totally free in one video. And that video is gonna be published pretty soon. So stay tuned if you want to see that out. If you're listening to this part of the video, honestly, you probably already know about this. So I'll see you when I publish it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Ow.